If you're looking at me, I think I'm looking at you. So it probably, being Friday, is time for us to start on our New York adventure with Edith Wharton. But you all know me well enough to know I like a good diversion. And Dan, when I was up here at one point, a couple weeks ago, said, "Hey, Ron, here's a book I think you might enjoy." Well, enjoy it. I did. I'm going to share it with you. It is available for sale upstairs in the rare books section, and the title of it is Marriage and Parentage. Look at that spine. And I don't know, I'll try to put it so that the light shines on it. There's not a design per se that you see in black and white, but there's actually an impressed design on the front that is really quite beautiful. I'm going to read you, just to put our story into a little bit of perspective, the title page. And the reason is, even the title page is funny. Marriage and Parentage, and the sanitary and psychological laws for the production of children. Oh, don't you wish you'd had this little book before you got married? Finer health and greater ability. It is written by no name, but a description. A physician and sanitarian. I hope that doesn't mean a garbage collector. Well, I don't know. The virtues of men and women, as well as their vices, may descend to their children. Fair warning. This book is a first edition. It was published in 1882. And I'm going to read you just a very small bit of something here. So I want to watch my time because I want to save most of it for Edith Wharton. Chapter 5, Health in Sanitary Marriage. Now, we're just all finding out how a good society and an accurate moral society operates. Health is a most important factor in a sanitary marriage. Let this subject be considered carefully. What is health? It is a condition, a state of being. The words hale, healthy, and holy have nearly the same meaning and origin. They are all derived from roots which have a signification similar to the words safe, sound, whole. A condition of health, then, is a condition of holiness, soundness, and physiological integrity, and not one of physiological bankruptcy. Now, there are two processes going on in the body continually, which influence and decide the healthy and normal conditions of every person. One is the process of waste, the other that of renewal, where the waste of the protoplasmic substance, or living matter of the body, is in excess of renewal. The tendency, if long continued, causes a disease state and makes a poor constitution. Now, when the renewal of the living matter is abundant, the constitution is good and the health is excellent. In childhood, growth is in excess of decay. In manhood's prime, there is an equilibrium of these processes. In declining years, the living matter of the body becomes scanty and is used up faster than it can be renewed. And then the physical integrity, the holiness and soundness of the body is not maintained. Health is the highest normal condition of all living things, man not accepted. It is that condition which gives ease and comfort and happiness. Nay, more, it gives power to accomplish the tasks of life, to fight its battles, to bear its burdens without fainting or growing weary. For great performances, extraordinary health is needed. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a subsequent week because I want to give you more taste of what the mindset was in the late 19th, that's the 1800s, century. Oh, this book is a perfect hoot. You will love this. And I'm just surfing through it, not even telling you everything. In the introduction of this book, the New York Stories of Edith Wharton, selected and with an introduction by Roxana Robinson. Now, I'm going to show you this, but a very dear friend of mine who has habits similar to mine literally eats books, so it's a little hard worn. I kind of tend to do the same thing to books I love. And anyway, she gave me this and said it was part of a reading group and would I like to read some short stories? And I thought, Edith Wharton, no, I don't think I do. Oh, well, maybe I'll read one. Oh my goodness. Edith Wharton was a fabulous writer, and I'd gone through nearly 74 years ignoring that fact. Now, from the introduction. The world into which Edith Wharton was born was a dignified one, carefully structured with a formal facade and an elevated entrance, based on a solid foundation of Puritan values. Remember this book? It was framed by inherited wealth and insulated by the belief that everything of worth was contained within. The unsettling winds of ambition, need, and change rarely penetrated the thick walls of tradition, pride, and entitlement. The interiors were polished, gleaming, and perfectly composed. The windows were shrouded with drapery. The floors were laid with a heavy carpet of decorum. This was a place of silence, order, and restraint. Now, a writer's world, both shelters and confines, and she must write her way both into and out of it. She must form her own world, but it will always be part of the one that formed her. It will always be both beginning and end of her journey. Edith Newbold Jones was born in 1862 in the family brownstone on West 23rd Street. Her forebears were Dutch, English, and Huguenots, a long line of successful merchants, bankers, and lawyers. Now, at the time of Edith's birth, her family had lived in New York for nearly 200 years. Now, the Joneses belonged to a small, privileged world of fashionable society. In these circles, family was more important than wealth, and George Frederick Jones was well off, but not rich. He had an income from inherited real estate, was mild, bookish, and gentlemanly, an affectionate father and indulgent husband. His wife, Lucretia Stevens Rhinelander Jones, was not rich either, Though she was from an old grand family, she was one of the poor Rhinelanders. Intellectually indolent, Lucretia was intensely absorbed by etiquette and appearances. As a mother, she was cold and critical. As a wife, she was possibly adulterous. Oh my gosh, she missed that chapter in this book. And as a person, she was mercilessly snobbish. From her father, Edith learned a love of books and of France. From her mother, she learned rigid self-discipline and sartorial perfectionism. From both parents, she learned the rules of decorum. Old New York was an insular, tribal society with a rigid caste system and a strict code of behavior. Now, we've had the lead-in with a little bit from the Book of the Times to Edith's collection of short stories. There are two stories that I absolutely, really love. This is one of them. And I'm going to read just about a third of it to you today, and then a third next Friday, and conclude with the final short story on the following Friday. This is called After Holbein. Anson Worley had had his moments of being a rather remarkable man, but they were only intermittent. They reoccurred at ever-lengthening intervals, and between times he was a small, poor creature, chattering with cold inside, in spite of his agreeable and even distinguished exterior. He had always been perfectly aware of these two sides of himself, which even in the privacy of his own mind, he contemptuously refused to dub a dual personality. And as the rather remarkable man could take fairly good care of himself, most of Worley's attention was devoted to ministering to the poor wretch who took longer and longer turns at bearing his name, and was more and more insistent in accepting the invitations which New York, for over 30 years, had tirelessly poured out on him. It was in the interest of this lonely, fidgety, unemployed self that Worley in his younger days had frequented the gaudiest restaurants and the most glittering palace hotels of two hemispheres, subscribed to the most advanced literary and artistic reviews, bought the pictures of the young painters who were being the most vehemently discussed, missed few of the showiest first nights in New York, London, Paris, or sought the company of men and women, especially women, most conspicuous in fashion, scandal, or any other form of social notoriety, and thus tried to warm the shivering soul within him at all the passing bonfires of success. Now, the original Anson Worley had begun by staying at home in his little flat with his books and his thoughts, when the other poor creature went forth. But gradually, he hardly knew when or how, he had slipped into the way of going to, till finally he made the bitter discovery that he and the creature had become one, except on the increasingly rare occasions when, detaching himself from all casual contingencies, he mounted to the lofty watershed which fed the source of his scorn. The view from there was vast and glorious. The air was icy but exhilarating. But soon he began to find the place too lonely and too difficult to get to, especially as the lesser Anson not only refused to go up with him, but began to sneer, at first ever so faintly, then with increasing insolence at the affectation of a taste for the heights. What's the use of scrambling up there anyhow? Now, I could understand if you brought down anything worthwhile, a poem or a picture of your own, but just climbing and staring, what does it lead to? Fellows with the creative gift have got to have their occasional Cineas. Oh, I can see that. But for a mere looker-on like you, isn't that sort of a pose? You talk awfully well. Oh, brilliantly, even. Oh, my dear fellow, no false modesty between you and me, please. But who the devil is there to listen to you up there among the glaciers? And sometimes when you come down, I notice that you're rather, well, heavy and tongue-tied. Look out, or they'll stop asking us to dine. And sitting at home every evening, oh, brr. Look here, by the way, if you've got nothing better for tonight, come along with me to Chrissy Tolerance's, or the Bob Briggs's, or Princess Kate's. Anywhere where there's lots of racket and sparkle, places that people go to in rolls, and that are smart and hot and overcrowded, and you have to pay a lot, in one way or another, to get in. Once and again, it is true, Worley still dodged his double and slipped off on a tour to remote, uncomfortable places where there were churches or pictures to be seen, or shut himself up at home for a good bout of reading, or just in the sheer disgust at his companion's platitude, spent an evening with people who were doing or thinking real things. This happened seldomer than of old, however, and more clandestinely, so that at last he used to sneak away to spend 2 or 3 days with an archaeologically minded friend, or an evening with a quiet scholar, as furtively as if he was stealing to a lover's tryst, which, as lovers' trysts were now always kept in the limelight, was, after all, a fair exchange. But he always felt rather apologetic to the other Worley about these escapades, and if the truth were known, rather bored and restless before they were over. And in the back of his mind there lurked an increasing dread of missing something hot and noisy and overcrowded when he went off on one of his mountain tops. After all, that highbrow business has been awfully overdone now, hasn't it? The little Worley would insinuate, rummaging for his pearl studs and consulting his flat evening watch as nervously as if it were a railway timetable. If only I haven't missed something really jolly by all this backing and filling. Oh, you poor creature, you. Always afraid of being left out, aren't you? Well, just for once, to humor you, and because I happen to be feeling rather stale myself, but only to think of a sane man's wanting to go places just because they're hot and smart and overcrowded. And off they would go together. Section 2. Now, all that was long ago. It was years now since there had been two distinct Worleys. The lesser one had made away with the other, done him softly to death without shedding of blood, and only few people suspected. And they no longer cared that the pale, white-haired man with the small, slim figure, the ironic smile, and the perfect evening clothes, whom New York still indefatigably invited, was nothing less than a murderer. Anson Worley. Anson Worley. No party was complete without Anson Worley. He no longer went abroad now to stiffen the joints, and there had been 2 or 3 slight attacks of dizziness, of nothing to speak of, nothing to think of even. But somehow one dug oneself into one's comfortable quarters and felt less and less like moving out of them, except to motor down to Long Island for weekends, or to Newport for a few visits in the summer. A trip to the hot springs to get rid of the stiffness had not helped much. And the aging Anson Worley, who really otherwise felt just as young as ever, had developed a growing dislike for the promiscuities of hotel life and the monotony of hotel food. Yes, he was growing more fastidious as he grew older. A good sign, he thought. Fastidious, not only about food and comfort, but also about people. It was still a privilege, a distinction to have him to dine. His old friends were faithful, and the new people fought for him and often failed to get him. To do so, they had to offer very special inducements in the way of cuisine, a conversation, or beauty. Young beauty, yes, that would do it. He did like to sit and watch a lovely face and call laughter into lovely eyes. But no dull dinners for him, not even if they fed you off of gold. As to that, he was as firm as the other Worley, the distant, aloof one with whom he had, parted company. Oh, quite amicably, a good many years ago. On the whole, since that parting, life had been much easier and pleasanter. And by the time the little Worley was 63, he found himself looking forward with equanimity to an eternity of New York dinners. Oh, but only at the right houses, always at the right houses. Now that was understood. The right people, the right setting, the right wines. He smiled a little over his perennial enjoyment of them and said, "Oh, nonsense, Fillmore," to his devoted, tiresome manservant, who was beginning to hint that really, every night, sir, and sometimes a dance afterward, was too much, especially when you kept at it for months on end. And Oh, damn your doctors, Worley snapped. He was seldom ill-tempered. He knew it was foolish and upsetting to lose one's self-control. But Fillmore, began to be a nuisance, nagging him, preaching at him, as if he himself wasn't the best judge. Besides, he chose his company. He'd stay at home any time rather than risk a boring evening. Damned rot, what Fillmore had said about his going out every night. Oh, not like poor old Mrs. Jasper, for instance. Oh, he smiled self-approvingly as he evoked her tottering image. That's the kind of fool Fillmore takes me for, he chuckled, his good humor restored by an analogy that was so much to his advantage. Poor old Evelina Jasper. In his youth and even in his prime, she had been New York's chief entertainer, leading hostess, the newspapers called her. Her big house in Fifth Avenue had been an entertaining machine. She had lived, breathed, invested, and reinvested her millions to no other end. And her first pretext had been that she had to marry her daughters. Oh, and amuse her sons. But when sons and daughters had married and left her, she seemed hardly aware of it. She had just, gone on entertaining hundreds, no, thousands of dinners. Oh, on gold plate, of course, and with orchids, and all the delicacies that were out of season had been served in that vast, pompous dining room, which one had only to close one's eyes to transform into a railway buffet for millionaires at a big junction before the investment or invention, rather, of restaurant trains. Worley closed his eyes and did so picture it. He lost himself in amused computation of the annual number of guests, of saddles of mutton, of legs of lamb, of terrapin, canvasbacks, magnums of champagne, and pyramids of hothouse fruit that must have passed through that room in the last 40 years. He now, he thought, hadn't one of the old Evelina's nieces told him the other day, half bantering, half shivering at the avowal, that the poor old lady, who was gently dying of softening of the brain, still imagined herself to be New York's leading hostess, still sent out invitations, which of course were never delivered, still ordered terrapin, champagne, and orchids, and still came down every evening to her great shrouded drawing rooms with her tiara askew on her purple wig to receive a stream of imaginary guests. Rubbish, of course. A macabre pleasantry of the extravagant Nellie Pierce, who had always had her joke at Aunt Evelina's expense. But Worley could not help but smiling at the thought that those dull, monotonous dinners were still going on in her hostess's clouded imagination. Poor old Evelina, he thought. In a way, she was right. There was really no reason why that kind of standardized entertaining should ever cease. A performance so undiscriminating, so undifferentiated, that one could almost imagine in the hostess's tired brain all the dinners she had ever given merging into one gargantuan pyramid of food and drink, with the same faces, perpetually the same faces, gathered solidly about the same gold plate. Thank heaven, Anson Worley had never conceived of social values in terms of mass and volume. It was years since he had dined at Mrs. Jasper's. even felt that he was not above reproach in that respect. 2 or 3 times in the past, he had accepted her invitations, always sent weeks ahead, and then chucked her at the 11th hour for, something much more amusing. Finally, to avoid such risks, he had made it a rule always to refuse her dinners. He had even, he remembered, been rather funny about it once, when someone had told him that Mrs. Jasper couldn't understand, was a little hurt. Said it couldn't be true that he always had another engagement the nights she asked him. True. Is it the truth that she wants? All right. Then the next time I get a Mrs. Jasper requests the pleasure, I'll answer her with Mr. Worley declines the boredom. Think she'll understand that, eh? The phrase became a catchword in his little set that winter. Mr. Worley declines the boredom. Good, good, good. Dear Anson, I do hope you won't decline the boredom of coming to lunch next Sunday to meet the new Hindu yogi, or the new saxophone soloist, or that genius of a mulatto boy who plays Negro spirituals on a toothbrush, and so on and on. He only hoped poor old Evelina never heard of it. We'll continue next Friday. Hold your appetite. Dinner's waiting. Till then, have a good weekend.